So any company that you hear that says, I have a way and this is the way for everybody, if you scratch that company, you will find they make exceptions for about a third of their employees. I've seen that again and again and again. What they say in the public is not what they necessarily do in private. So there are some companies that tend to do it particularly well.
Rishad is the one-name oracle of marketing who shows up with truth bombs, not buzzwords. In just 15 seconds, he'll make you question your org chart, your leadership style, and maybe your career. This episode, buckle up. Eric Troutman, the czar of the TCPA, isn't just the guy you call when your phone rings too much. He's the guy you must call. Need to navigate the legal minefield of robocalls, texts, and telemarketing nightmares? Troutman doesn't just give you advice. He hands you a roadmap, a compass, and a do not press this button sign. Practical? Yes. Actionable? Absolutely. And if you're not calling him first, let's be honest, you're probably making a mistake.
Welcome back to the ADOTAT Show, where we peel back the layers of the ad industry faster than a marketing exec deletes cookies. I'm Pesach Latin, your host, your guide, and possibly the only guy in the ad world who will call out the nonsense while sipping on a coffee that costs less than a CPM. Today I'm joined by a guest who needs no last name. He's the Cher of strategy, the Madonna of marketing, and maybe, just maybe, the Dalai Lama of digital transformation. That's right, it's Rishad Tobaccowala is here, the guy who's been calling out BS in the industry long before it was cool, author of Restoring the Soul of Business, and the man who can explain why ads are broken and how to fix them. Well, make it all sound a little bit like poetry. So first of all, Rishad, as I mentioned, you're like the Madonna or Cher of the ad world. One name, instantly recognizable, but instead of belting out hits, you're challenging how we think about work. So is the future of work really about evolution? Or are we just slapping a new coat of paint on a burnout engine?
So I was very fortunate that my parents gave me a name that isn't Jim, John, Jane, or Jill.
Right.
So it's more than that, and that's probably why people know me by one name, and it's also probably because I make such nonsense happen that they say steer away from that one name. But with that being said, to your question, first of all, thank you for inviting me. To your question, I believe that work between 2019 and 2029, the 10 years, we're halfway there, will change more than it has in the previous 50 years. So it's obviously a continuation in the fact that we suddenly didn't shift into some new zone. So in that way, it's evolution. But the speed and how much is going to happen in the next, in these 10 years versus the previous 50 is revolution.
She says.
If last touch attribution worked, your waiter would take full credit for your meal. We make sure the chef gets credit too. Incremental.
So you said it's no longer about work-life balance, but fitting work into life. What does that actually look like? Are we talking about a harmonious utopia where no one gets pinged after 5 p.m.? Or is this just a clever rebrand for work anywhere, anytime, forever?
I would basically say that it is more like work when you want, where you want, but usually all over the place, but in times that are more aligned some of the time with what you want to do versus what your company wants to do. So very simply, there are 3 key beliefs I have of work. One is that work, along with health and relationships, are the 3 things that give people happiness and success in life. If you have good relationships, you've got your physical health, and you've got meaningful, productive work, it matters a lot. Second is work in the fact that it requires time, effort, craft, constant learning, and usually it requires some form of transfer of money from you, the worker, to whoever may be buying that work, your client or somebody, a company. And as a result, it isn't always on your terms. So you are not going to a spa. When you go to a spa, you pay the spa doesn't pay you. So I remind people, work is not a spa, right? And if you enjoy your work 70% of the time, you have an incredible job. What is basically happening is it now allows us to ensure that we do as much of the work that we need to in times and places and under circumstances that we prefer versus those that we don't prefer. It doesn't mean we won't do work in circumstances that we don't prefer. But if 2 out of 3 of those pieces of work are done in pieces we prefer, that's better than in the past. Many years ago, we had no choice about where, when, or how. Now we do. Now there is obviously a downside, which you rightly point out, that you don't, at some particular stage, apparently at some stage, you could work from 9 to 5. But I think that ended the day the telephone was put together, even before online, people could call you. And 9 to 5 were regular hours, but people worked till 8 and 9 and 10. And long before the internet, in Japan, they work 12 hours a day, 5 to 6 days. So it isn't that all this revolution, that the revolutionary thing is that you can work and you're supposed to work all the time. But what it does do is it does a few things, which is you can now have multiple bosses, which is kind of interesting. So
Right.
2/3 of people under Gen Z, 2/3 of Gen Z people in the United States who have a full-time job have a side gig or side hustle with which they also make money. Now, there can be many reasons for it. One is they're not being paid well enough, so they need to do that. Another is they have certain passions which they can monetize. Those passions may not allow them today to monetize enough to pay for everything, but it allows them to do that. And the other, it provides them some optionality. They start building their brand and they build relationships in other places. A lot of these things, I think, are going to, the modern world is increasingly, I believe, going to benefit talent versus capital, even though capital thinks it's the other way around.
So are there any companies that you think are doing this right?
I believe almost every company in certain sections is doing it right. So any company that you hear that says, I have a way and this is the way for everybody, if you scratch that company, you will find they make exceptions for about 1/3 of their employees. I've seen that again and again and again. What they say in the public is not what they necessarily do in private. So there are some companies that tend to do it particularly well. I would say among the new sort of companies like a Dropbox, company like Basecamp, and others have done this particularly well, where they basically tell their talent, here are our expectations of you. We basically will allow you to work from wherever you want, whenever you want, as long as you get your work done. However, we expect you once a quarter to show up for a week at this particular place, and we will provide you with both training, relationship building, and a whole bunch of other things. So, and you see that also in, State Farm and Allstate. You see that in Citi relative to other banks. Basically, the underlying basic belief is if a company says that they have a culture and their culture uses the word trust, then they better trust their employees and trust their talent. And if they claim that their culture is dragging people 5 days a week into an office, monitoring them, and then telling them that they have a culture of trust, that's total bullshit.
What about those people who just can't fit into this new dynamic? Do we just leave them behind?
There isn't. So, for instance, I believe that there isn't a one-size-fits-all. In fact, I do believe that everyone, very much like we have diversity in many, many kinds of things, I believe we also have different working styles, that different people find themselves productive in different ways. And there will be, what I always ask or suggest to companies is you should give the option to people who, either for reasons of temperament or a family situation or space, need to be in an office 5 days a week. And at the very same time, you need to basically provide the support and backup for people who cannot be in the office maybe more than 1 or 2 days a month. And the reality of it is a company will also decide what exceptions they make based on 3 very simple things, which is how important and rare is that piece of talent? What and who am I competing with in that particular marketplace for that talent? And 3, can I, by having that person or those people, send a signal to the marketplace that attracts and retains other talent? Because I've always basically said, if you really want to have an understanding of what companies today are attracting and retaining talent, it's not what their HR department does or what nonsense is put on their websites or on their apps. It's basically people ask people who work in that company, what do you think about working there? What are the ups and downs? And so my belief is if you want to attract people, you need to basically have different ways of working and supporting different people in different lifestyles and different perspectives. So there isn't a one size fits all. And I also don't believe that the office is a bad thing. I believe actually the office can be a good thing if you decide to actually not pretend what's actually happening in the office and not. So I'll give you an idea. I grew up in the advertising space, as many of us have, and if you ask people in the advertising space or in any space, why do you want people to come back to the office 5 days a week or 4 days a week? So here's what they'll tell you. Number 1, in order to build a culture. Number 2, in order to build relationships. Number 3, in order to get trained. Number four, in order to basically better able to service their clients. Those are some of the reasons that they say. Oh, and then the fifth one is to have creative ideas, okay?
Right.
And learn. Okay.
Well, isn't that pretty much what Mark Reed said?
Yeah, okay. So let me give you, maybe I missed something. I worked for 38 years full time. So clearly I was dumbass because I missed something. But here's what at least I figured out in my 38 years. Most of the time when we wanted to have creative brainstorming, we left the office and we went to offsites. When we wanted to build relationships, we went to bars and restaurants. When we wanted to learn, we went to CES and Cannes and other places, right? So every single thing was odd. The other is I spent 20 to 25% of my time in the office. I spent 80% of my time with my clients or in other offices. So the reality of it is nothing that I actually did actually occurred in the office. So that
It's
is
always hybrid?
it always was. It is for every leader. Long before there was COVID, ask a leader where they work from.
Right.
Right? And so the reality of it is this is total bullshit. This is absolute bullshit. Here's what's happening. The question should not be how do I get people back to the office? The question is how do I maximize the benefits of in-person interaction? And where do I manage the benefits of in-person interaction? And how do I manage it? I will tell you something. I believe that many people, one of the reasons that they're resisting returning to the office, there are lots of good reasons to resist, from costs and flexibility and childcare and looking after other people. But there's another big reason that nobody actually states, which I will state. They don't want to return to their bosses. Okay? Because this is the age of debossification. The bosses are not willing to change. What bosses are doing is they're allocating, checking in, monitoring, and other bullshit. I want a leader. I don't want a sort of a warm body who checks in on me. The reality of it is every company did perfectly well. And even, let's even look at let's look at the companies for which I actually have numbers and I pay attention. I don't pay attention to my old place of work for a variety of reasons, but I do pay attention to some of the numbers from a WPP or an IPG or others. So they, between COVID and now, have increased their headcount about 20%. They, between COVID and now, have reduced their real estate space between 25 and 40%. That has led to 200 basis points of extra earnings, and both of those companies were under stock price pressure. So now just look at this. You have 30% less space, 20% more employees than 4 years ago, and you want to bring everybody back into the office. Isn't that cute? Okay, so the reality of it is there is no math, there is no meaning. It's a failure of leadership, a failure of imagination. And let me tell you this, if I were to start a company and I wanted world-class talent, I would ever force people 5 days in the office to a place. Never. I'd basically have people who don't have job options. And if you actually scratch most of these companies hard enough, they make exceptions for between 25 and 35% of their employees, every one of them right now. Right now, right? So my whole stuff is you can't even speak truthfully. What are you talking about? The reality of it is we have entered an age of debossification. People are basically asking, I want a leader, I don't want a boss. What the hell do you actually do? And this is the way they respond, right? Silly.
Are we becoming CEOs of ourselves?
Yes, we are basically, I've always basically believed, and I've written about this, and even when I worked for a long, long time in a large company and succeeded, I always have told people, and I tell people today when I advise people, you must learn how to operate like a company of one. Even if you're in a company of thousands, a company of one. A company of one does not mean I, me, mine, right? A company of one means 3 or 4 things. Number one is you should be able to have a craft that people will hire you for, and you have to hone your craft. Number two, you need to be known for a positive API, being collaborative, helpful, generous, so people can reach out to you and you will reach out. Third is you need to basically constantly learn and have a growth mindset, because that's the only way to be a company of one. And number four is you need to basically build your reputation and recognize that 2 years ago I told people your resume is not your LinkedIn profile or the little page on your hard drive. It's what comes up when people Google you.
Right.
Okay.
And that's changing very fast.
That's changing very fast. And so one of the key things is, even though I am not looking for a job at this, I always look for people who will buy my book and other kinds of things. I'm not looking for a job. There are 2 or 3 things I did in the last 90 days. And this is as someone with 43 years of experience. The fact that I'm running around doing it because I'm now really a company of one, I ask everybody to do. Well, not asking, I say just consider it. You have to decide whether it's right for you. So number one is I basically have over the years gone out of my way to make sure that I write, I do all kinds of, I have a podcast, I write, I have a YouTube channel. This way I can be discovered. Second, I've made a lot of that accessible to now the LLMs. So when somebody basically interrogates me on a Claude or a Gemini, I come back looking really good. Okay.
Right.
I made sure most recently I changed my LinkedIn profile. I removed stuff that was silly like Rishad Tobaccowala LLC and reframed it completely. And my basic belief is I'm operating as a company of one. I was doing that when I was working at Publicis, which is a company of 106,000 people. Okay, so I'm not saying company of one is I, me, mine, I don't have to work for a company. But if you don't have the ability to have optionality, what you're basically doing is, Carrie Underwood wanted Jesus to drive the car. Too many people want HR to drive their career car. You need to drive your career car, not HR.
So imagine it's 2029 and you're designing the workplace of the future. Considering everything we spoke about, what would you absolutely include, and what's the one thing you'd consider banning forever?
So what I would include in the workplace of the future is I would organize something with the following 4 beliefs. One is it would be very, very organized, keeping only 2 people in mind, my customer and my talent, which is how do I make sure that my customer can access my talent in the fastest possible way, and how can I create an organization that attracts and retains the most talent? That's number one. Number 2, I would make it very permeable. What I mean by permeable, I believe we're working in a world of marketplaces, of gig work, of speed. So very permeable, recognizing that most of the employees in my company would not be full-time. Most of the work in the company would not be done full-time. And that what I really need to do is I need to set up a structure where me as a company enables talent rather than talent enables my company. That would be another structure thing I'd have. The other thing that I'd basically do, in addition to all of those, I'd make sure that I found ways to invest deeply or encourage and enable anybody who works in my company to get 10 to 15% of their time. And I would try, where possible, to underwrite some of it for them to increase their mental operating systems and learn new things. I believe the shelf life of knowledge, unfortunately, is declining really fast. So I think we have to spend 10 to 15% of time every year just to keep up to date. And so I'd have that. So all of those things, those would be my sort of architecture. I would also, where possible, ensure that everybody had 1 or 2 people who were their mentors or they were mentees too, or they were mentoring. Because I believe, relationships are intensely important. So those are things I would do. What would be the thing that I would make sure that I would not do? I would make sure that I did not emphasize experience over expertise. I would make absolutely certain that I did not confuse compensation with size of budget or number of people reporting to people. And I would basically make sure that I questioned anybody who believes that their power comes from a zone of control versus a zone of influence. So I would rather have few people paid really, really well, plugging and playing with lots of different people, than basically saying because you have large budgets and large troops and large amount of years is what makes you senior. There wouldn't be senior, junior. There'd basically simply be how much you got paid based on the outcomes you did either outside or what you did in enabling those outcomes inside.
I want to move a little bit on and talk about the ad industry that's been caught in the same loop for decades. Bigger promises, big budgets, and barely any breakthroughs. It's like watching a magician pull the same rabbit out of the same hat year after year, but now the rabbit has a QR code. So my question to you is advertising really evolving, or are we just chasing our tails in shinier circles?
So I believe advertising is evolving, and we have reached, the very famous Mr. Ernest Hemingway wrote a line, which was about a character. I wasn't Ernest Hemingway, I think maybe it was Scott Fitzgerald, who wrote a line that basically said the person went broke gradually and then they went broke suddenly. I think what's basically happened is for the last 20 years, the marketing services and agency business have been changing gradually, and now we're about to say it's changed very, very suddenly. And one of the reasons you're seeing so much trauma in the last year or two, or about to even see more trauma or drama is because of those changes. So what are those? There are four significant shifts that have all come together, and then I'll give you an idea of where it's going to show up or turn out. So the first significant shift that's basically happened is I believe that, and I wrote to you, that there isn't any particular media. All media have melted into each other. A long time ago, I basically said digital leaks across categories. So we've always thought about compartments and categories. We've planned, we've hired, we've organized agencies according to compartments and categories. It makes no sense. I launched one of the first digital agencies in 1993. I stopped working in digital in 2002 because I thought it was going to become mainstream. Okay.
Right.
So the first one is there's this leakage, and everybody is by Substack. The future does not fit in the containers of the past. We have all these old containers that we're having pressure on.
Right. Well, as I said, Gen Z doesn't even know what a silo is.
Where silo is. That's number one. Number two is you can't actually now separate, I believe, in this modern world, data from creativity from measurement. All of those things are melding together. So increasingly, we're moving into what I call the connected age. You're going to have to find ways to connect. And that is basically connect data to external interactions and media to creativity. So you're going to have storytelling on one side, but on one side, you have storytelling as obviously a component, insights, data, and measurement as another component, and interfaces, which we could basically call today media or chats or conversations or search as the third one. And we're going to have to find all of those to interconnect them in a way that as an individual, I want stuff that's personalized. As a company, I want stuff where I can actually have a seamless interface both with them and for my measurement. So it's this whole idea of paradox. Everybody's looking for a silver bullet, and I think they're going to be multiple bullets, not one bullet. So that's the second shift. The third shift, which I think is extremely important, is AI is going to both significantly eliminate the ability to charge for time and materials. And today, almost all agency and marketing services are built on time and materials. FTEs, how many hours? To see an indication of that, look no further than legal firms and consulting services. Every one of these world-class consulting firms who I have lots of friends with at, and I visit very often, let's say McKinsey, BCG, are basically having fewer partners, are delaying the number of people who are joining their company, and are doing all kinds of things. Because if you look at a law firm or a consulting firm, they do two things. One is they have some amazingly talented, all their people are talented, but they have some amazingly talented people who have crystallized intelligence, the ability to look at dots in completely new ways. And then the other one that they have is they have an incredible body of databases and work. And what they basically do, they have a senior partner who quickly understands the situation, a bunch of young people who do case studies, who look at those databases and provide that. All of that is going to basically 50 to 60% of that bottom part, not all of it, but 50 to 60% is already replaceable by Google Gemini 1.5 deep research. I started using it, and it gives me better decks than McKinsey does, and I've seen the McKinsey deck. Okay, and it costs me $20 a month. Now, it doesn't mean there won't be senior people, but there will be. So they're starting to close up. Law firms. A lot of what law firms do is it's basically, previous cases, right? All of that now is plugged and played, and you don't need. And so someone who's young in a law firm says, I'm not working 15 years to be a partner. I want to be a partner in 6. The same thing's going to basically happen in our world, which to a great extent, with the exception of certain types of systems integration and media, nothing else requires scale in our business. If you can plug and play into systems integration and media, you can do everything without scale. And you take the fact that you don't need scale, and you built up all these scale businesses. You don't need creative scale, a lot of these other scales you don't need. You basically have the fact that you got to charge for time and materials. Add that just because you know the way 20 years ago means nothing today. It basically simply means that I believe that you have to reimagine and reinvent the company. I will not speak my book, but there is a reason that one holding company is worth more than the next 2 combined. Okay? And that primarily is because that holding company decided they don't want to be a holding company and they want to leave advertising and marketing communication and move into a different type of business. Because recognizing that this business at its core was going nowhere. So I think that is beginning to happen. I sense that's what's going to basically happen is, my guess is Omnicom, IPG, will be a flaming mess. WPP will go through private equity without a doubt. Dentsu will retreat completely to Japan. And what you're going to basically have, nobody really talks now about Havas. or Stagwell or any of these other places. They do, but on the edge.
Right.
Nobody talks about S4. When S4 was launched, everybody laughed at me. I basically said too focused, too small, and too late, which is exactly what happened. The reality of it is you have to reimagine the industry. This is what I say. Too many people in the industry are doing the following. Having lived through this particular thing, let's suppose you were the newspapers and the newspapers discovered digital. Now, most newspapers didn't discover any part of digital and refused to accept it, which is why outside of maybe the New York Times and a couple of others, everybody's gone away or has declined significantly. What are most agencies doing today? Even with the world of what is the latest thing called AI. They're trying to basically decide how to use AI to become more efficient and to be more effective, right? So it's how do I make things cheaper and how do I make things more impactful? And then they're going around telling everybody how they're going to differentiate using AI. Now, let me give you a couple of thoughts and I'll tell you what's actually happening. Now, remember, I don't have a job, so this is totally delusional, but let's try this. Number one, I believe AI itself is not a differentiator. In fact, I believe I have better AI than almost every agency and every client. Because their AI what's their AI? It comes from LLMs. All the LLMs are seven LLMs, right? I pay $20 a month, I pay $120 and I have them all. Most companies pay for one and they used 6 months ago, which is half as good. So you don't have better technology. What you might have is better talent and better data, but I'm not sure if you don't connect the data and talent, it doesn't work. Okay, so that's number one. So AI is not a differentiator. Efficiency and effectiveness is like basically the newspapers using digital to make their trucks faster and their printing presses faster. That's not what this is about. This is about existential risk and reimagining your business. This is basically deciding the future of newspapers is not print or trucks. It's multimedia. It's what the New York Times became. That is what is happening. And right now, if you look at most agencies, how do I use AI to be more efficient? How do I use AI to become more effective? I will differentiate using AI. Wrong, wrong, wrong. So you take that, you take the 20 years of change, and I basically believe we will not recognize this space 1,000 days from now.
Do you think that we're going to look back and see it as the savior of our industry or the thing that destroyed our industry?
Here's what I basically believe. I believe that I'm very bullish on the future of marketing. I am not very bullish on most marketing services organizations. So what do I mean by that? Marketing at its base is about understanding and meeting customer requirements.
Right.
And people's requirements. And people have more choice, more power, they have godlike power, and therefore marketing is becoming more important. Marketing also is one of the few spaces where you actually manage and merge data and storytelling, though storytelling much broader than it used to be. You can't storytell in finance without going to jail. You can't storytell in accounting without going to jail. You can't storytell in law without going to jail, right? Most of those industries are so math and left brain based that they're going to be replaced much faster than our industry. And the reason is because people choose with their hearts and they use numbers to justify what they just did. Because of that, I think marketing as a service and a need and an area is going to be very, very important. However, most marketing services, not all, but most marketing services organization, if you look at them, are struggling. Accenture is not struggling. Publicis is not struggling. Certain things like the trade desk and others are not struggling, but everybody else tends to basically be struggling. If you look at the commonality of the ones that are not struggling, they basically are reimagining their business and they're completely trying to do a lot of new things while managing the old things. But most of the other people are basically putting lipstick on the pig and basically saying, we've arrived. No, you've not arrived. And what is also happening at this particular stage is the marketing services industry also does a couple of things which is going to have a big problem. A lot of the marketing services industry, like a lot of services industry, makes its money by upcharging its youngest talent the most. That talent has two issues. One is it's going to be harder and harder to upcharge that young talent because there's going to be machines doing it. But more important, the really talented ones of those young talent don't want to work for these companies or are asking the following question. And here is the question. And this is because I've now not been working in the real world, I guess. This is the question I ask boards. I'm on boards, but this is the question I ask on boards. So if you look into boards, this is what they'll say. Because of AI, there may be increased productivity from our talent, which will increase our profit margins. Okay. This goes back to the future of work. Let me understand this. I am using technology that significantly improves my productivity and I'm going to hand it over to my company?
Right.
Since when? Since when? I will do what is necessary, and I will use all my other productivity for myself and my other interests. I am not your slave. I do not work for you 24 hours a day, right?
Will people be leasing out that?
I basically believe we will be leasing out our skills, capabilities, and technologies to people, and we will create a portfolio career as long as we figure out how to get insured, which is the only thing I'm very worried about in the United States, is that I believe the last thing that's keeping people attached to companies is insurance coverage.
Right.
Young people, etc.
Who's going to cover the? Oh, you mean insured when it comes to health insurance?
Healthcare, and other insurance, right? Because what tends to be
freedom sounds nice until you're in the hospital.
Freedom sounds nice. So what basically happens is, in my book, I have an entire chapter, and people have read it, and I've written my chapter not to basically be, talent rules, companies don't win. Everything I've written basically says customers of companies have to win, companies have to win, and talent has to win. If those three don't all win, you don't have a business. You have something really weird going on, right? So what I would say is this. Just think about it this way. Today, three things are going on which are interesting to the marketing services industry. Almost all industries tend to have one form of ism which nobody talks about, which is ageism.
Right.
So ageism is kind of interesting. It's the discrimination of us against our future selves. It's the most amazing discrimination. All discrimination is bad, but this discrimination is actually discriminating against our future selves. Fantastic. And there's a lot of reasons we say that in the marketing services businesses. People don't understand, or seasoned people don't understand new technologies. They don't understand culture. They don't understand how to work with next generation of talent. Also, which nobody says, is they're more expensive. Okay, so that's the thing. Now let's look at this. The only group of people who are growing in population are people over 50 years old in the United States. And 75% of America's wealth is held by people over 50 years. So you're going to basically have to create a new type of employee called what I call a fractionalized employee for various reasons. You're probably going to require only 75% of the capabilities of your people because of AI and other stuff. You don't want to get rid of 25% because you might require everybody. But you might tell everybody, hey, look, I'm going to employ you for 75% of the time. You're going to get 75% of the income, 75% of everything, 100% of healthcare. The other 25%, you can do whatever you want as long as it's not competitive. Look after your parents, or learn something, do a side gig and side job. That works as long as you have 100% healthcare. Today, most companies give you only three choices. Full-time work with healthcare. You're a contract worker. That means you've got to be working at, Wipro or something where you may get healthcare, or freelance where you don't get healthcare. Right. Next year, there'll be more freelance workers in the United States than full-time workers. So one of the things I would do in my new company is I would offer, and I'm starting to look technologically wise that people are offering. I would basically say, I'd like you to work 60% of the time. I'll give you 100% of healthcare, 60% of everything else. I'll hire 60% world-class people to cover my client. I'll get much more work done than that. Some of them will want to go back to school. Other people have to look after young kids. Other people have to look after aging parents, whatever they want. That's one of the other things I would basically do. None of those things are being talked about. And that's what I really understand, which is if you actually listen, what I've always basically said is if you go to 5 meetings in 5 different companies and they all say the same 5 things, that means you've entered commodity thinking. Right? And that's what a whole industry has become. Everybody says the same thing, goes to the same events, incestuous bullshit, nothing new coming out. And I believe I have great faith in marketing and I have great faith in talent. And my talent is not just young talent, including supposedly seasoned and over-the-hill talent like myself, maybe still relevant. So I think talent is talent. It's
something. I'm turning 50 in a few months, and it's something I've been thinking about.
Yeah, and by the way,
what does that mean in my industry when I turn 50?
Yeah, and what basically happens is, here's the stuff. You will want to, either because your wife doesn't want you to get in her way or whatever it is, okay? I believe that you will want to work maybe till 70 or maybe more, okay? Now, it'll be different kinds of work, which is you may not need to. Let's say you've found ways to get income that you don't need to. But you'll find other ways to do stuff because work isn't just about income. It's about purpose, growth, meaning, community, a lot of things. So why aren't we thinking about work that way? Why aren't we thinking about productivity that way? Why aren't we thinking about technology that way? All we're basically thinking about is how do we do the bullshit we do today more efficiently?
Right.
which is like, what's that about? Tell me where wealth has been created in our category. It has been created from outside our category, at Accenture, at McKinsey, at other places. It's been created to a certain extent at Publicis, where the market cap is bigger than everybody else, because it's reimagined. Okay, and again, I'm talking my own book of business, so maybe they suck, but the other people don't. Okay, so I really believe it's astonishing. Let me ask you this, and this I find like really, really unusual. I always go to people and say, who do you want to work for? And you know who they name? People, not companies.
No one says I want to work for Apple. Maybe they did in the day. Maybe when Steve Jobs was there, they said that, but they also said Steve Jobs. They want to work for Steve Jobs.
But now it's basically, I want to, for these people, I want to work, right? And what are people looking for? The other stuff is, people say, I said, like, what is your talent looking for? So all these people say, we're solving for talent. So I said, okay, that's really cool. What does your talent want? And this is what they normally come up with, right? Talent wants high income, work-life balance, and a couple of other things. So I said, okay, that's not what they want. Okay, here's what they actually want. And I've done a lot of deep research about this, and I also worked and had the opportunity to work with world-class people, so I figured out what they wanted, because the only way I could keep them was figuring out what they wanted. Everybody wants the same three things: money, fame, and power. If you're younger, it's money and fame basically is recognition, and power might be autonomy, but we all want money, fame, and power. That's number one. And that's when you join a company, it's very important, money, fame, and power. The reason you stay in a company is a little different than what you join a company. Purpose, values, and connections. Do you align with the purpose? Do you find the values of the company properly, and do you feel connected to your leader, your boss, your client? How do you thrive in a company? So I eventually basically said, okay, I got to make sure that they kind of like me, and I pay them sort of well, and I recognize them. But how do I make them thrive? Now I got them to join, and I've got them to stay. How do I make them thrive?
Right.
It's three very interesting things. Let me tell my story, give me freedom, and help me grow. Tell me how many talent and HR departments are based on giving people freedom and flexibility, growth, and letting them tell their story. What they do is that
HR is all about protecting the company. Is that not usually the truth?
But so if HR is protective and talent and development is about something else, why are they not doing that? Because I'll tell you what, I've always basically believed in today's environment where people want freedom, growth, and story, purpose, values, and connections, forcing people, if you're not a dentist, back into the office 5 days a week is trying to solve cancer by making people smoke more.
Are we losing our humanity?
We've lost our humanity, and we are. And the big problem simply is there's a complete revolution. Many senior people are not aware of how much information, data, and stuff that younger people have about the company, including income and what people do. And nobody is not the right word. A majority of people do not want, they would like the income, they would like the tangible benefits and material assets of their leaders, but they don't want to be like their leaders. They basically believe that the leaders have spent too much time paying their dues, and they don't understand what those dues are in today's world. It's like me basically saying, you can't work hard enough unless you spend 5 years typewriting. Why do I want to do that? Okay. So in effect, we've had that. I think the balance of power has moved towards talent versus capital, talent versus management, and management and capital doesn't really realize that. The only place you need massive capital is if you're NVIDIA and Taiwan Semiconductor and other places. In other places, you don't. And that is a big thing that most of our management... Tell me, how many leaders in our industry do people look up to? We have how many people in our industry? We have over 3-4 million people in marketing and advertising services, and you hear the same names again and again.
Right. And a lot of them are old names. There's no new names.
There are no new names. There are two reasons there are no new names. First of all, we don't allow people to build their brands. Second is they aren't being trained particularly well. And what's particularly interesting is I've always asked people, like when I used to hire people, I would ask a very simple question, because I used to at some stage hire very senior people. Two very simple questions. Number one is, can you tell me 3 or 4 people whose careers you have built so they become successful? I don't care about you. Tell me the 3 or 4 people who I can call right now who would say their success is based in part because of you. Tell me who those people are. Number one. Number two, I
always love when people approach me at convention. They go, I worked for you for 20 years, 20 years ago, and now I'm CEO of my own company. Thank you.
Exactly.
That's the best feel of the world, I think.
What you've learned, and very good leaders I have learned from, basically run the most amazing Ponzi schemes. Okay, a good Ponzi scheme. They're surrounded by amazing people who do all the work. They give credit to the people who do all the work. Those people become amazing stars who hire other stars, and you have this incredible Ponzi scheme. And so what tends to happen is it's reflected. As people always say, there's so many shiny planets around you, you must be a star too, even though nobody knows who you are. That's a much better way of saying you're a star than being a star yourself. That's number one. But the other thing, to a great extent in this particular world, the other question I ask is this, which is, can I talk to 3 people you worked for who you currently don't work for, so I can ask them real questions? And usually the answer to those 2 let me know about 60 to 70% of the time whether I want to hire that person, she or him, in a moment, right?
Right.
And it's got nothing to do, because my basic belief is, at this level, I truly basically believe that you know what you're doing, right? These 2 things teach me a lot. And the third thing I always basically ask them is, what have you learned in the last year? Okay, because what I simply say is, if you can manage great talent and have a growth mindset, I think you'll be pretty well done, assuming, you wear deodorant and you don't smell. You should be fit. And those are things and look at the things we go through, charts and graphs, and my stuff is, who does any of this? And that is what I've always basically said, is like a lot of what we do is process. We keep talking, so many companies, all these things, you look at these decks, you look at these things, all of them keep talking about how their colon works. But very few people can show you cool shit.
Right.
Right?
Yeah, I was awake during my procedure, so I know what it looks like.
Got it. There we are. Hopefully everything was clean.
Everything was great.
Great.
I will never do it without drugs again.
You should do it with drugs. I don't know why you did it without drugs. Maybe you were trying to get a job somewhere in the modern marketing industry and getting used to it.
How much of this is that there's just poor leadership training now?
There is. So I think we have a crisis of leadership. So, there are 3 things I'm currently working on. One, I've historically worked on and have told people, or have at least let people think I'm good at this, which is future, right? So I call it the future resulted in the containers past. Second is obviously with this book and other things, it's about where work is going. The third is with a gentleman called Drew Yanni. He and I have started a new initiative called the Athena Project, which is about modern leadership. Because we began to realize I talked to about 100 leaders, and leaders were struggling to lead in today's world. And these are great leaders. So here's what I believe the challenge of modern leadership is. And by the way, there are amazing leaders. The challenge with modern leadership is 3. The first with modern leadership is we have all, including in our industry, talked about full stack. But what happens is, as you grow in this industry or in any industry, you grow through craft, but then eventually you have to deal with complexity. Craft is full stack. Complexity is being a wide spectrum. So modern leadership is going from being full stack to being wide spectrum. That's one key challenge. The second is, how do you, and in order to do that, you have to increase your impact. And your impact just isn't in your work, but your impact with talent, with your cohorts across your organization. How do you do that? Second, leaders are asking, how do they increase their influence? Because they've grown up in a zone of control and they have to grow up in a zone of influence. They also want to bring their old brand and reputation. So how do they write? How do they speak? How do they do books? How do they get on boards? That's the second one. You ask these people, that's what they're working. And the third is, how do they increase their intelligence? Not just about AI, but about things like private equity and a whole bunch of other things that are impacting our industry. And what you find is nobody is helping them, or very few people are helping them increase their influence, increase their impact, and increase their intelligence. When they go to any of these things, it's all about networking, being sold to, and doing more of the same. So I do believe that we have a crisis of leadership. And 2 of the chapters in my book, in the first section, I basically, or the second section, I talk about the end of bosses and the rise of leaders. And then another chapter in my book is basically retraining the workforce, which is everybody.
Right.
And one of the things I always also find amusing is very few companies today are investing in training, growth, and education. Very few.
For leaders, or in general.
Yeah. And
But one company I always think about, and most people know, is Walmart. Walmart has an amazing leadership program.
Yeah, well, Walmart has an amazing leadership program. Other companies that have invested deeply in leadership recently, Bank of America has been putting a lot of money into leadership programs. Microsoft has been putting a lot of money into leadership programs. I know because this is one of the things I'm attached to. Publicis Group is putting a huge amount of money into leadership programs because that's the only way they could get from A to where they need to go. But For a long time, we cut back. The company I grew up in, and I think if I had learned anything, had the best leadership program among ad agencies in the 80s and early 90s was the Leo Burnett Company. They've sent so much money. In fact, the first 3 months you joined the company, you went to a training program. Where do we do that now? Okay. And so what tends to basically happen is we keep talking about See, this my basic line is this. Companies do not change. Companies do not transform. People do, right? We're spending money on real estate, technology, infrastructure, and PR. Can we please put some money into the people?
All right, before we go, we've had quite a conversation. What is one thing you'd want people to remember about you, not just professionally, but as a person?
So I would hope that people would see me as someone who helped them see, think, and feel differently about how to grow themselves, their teams, and their company, whichever mattered to them. So at the end of it, when somebody comes and says, he helped me see, think, or feel differently about either how to grow myself, my team, or my business, whichever of those three makes sense to you, or all three, is what I want people to leave people with. So I want people to remember me with how I helped them grow than anything else.
Well, I appreciate you coming on. You've been a philosopher, a provocateur, and one heck of a guest. And thanks for joining us and proving that you only need one name in this industry. Are we going to get you to dance?
Well, I don't know if you're going to get me to dance, but what I will basically...
That's it for this episode, and let's be honest, you probably need a minute to recover. Rishad Tobaccowala didn't just drop insights, he dropped warnings, frameworks, and a not-so-gentle reminder that if your leadership strategy was built in PowerPoint, it's already out of date. He's not here for the buzzwords, he's here to dismantle the systems we take for granted and build something smarter, leaner, and actually human. If you're still calling your top-down org chart a culture, Rishad just handed you the blueprint for how it breaks. And none of this would be possible without the sponsors who help us keep the lights on and the truth bombs lit. Troutman Amin, the law firm everyone knows and everyone knows they need. Whether you're dealing with TCPA nightmares, data privacy rabbit holes, or just trying to keep your brand out of a courtroom headline, they're the quiet power you want behind you. And incremental.com, because let's be honest, if you're not measuring impact, you're just setting money on fire and calling it strategy. These are the folks who actually show you what's working and what's working against you. Thanks for tuning in. Stay bold, stay curious, and know more than you did yesterday.